Hello, this is the Mushroom Wizard, and I'm returning once again with another presentation regarding the mushrooms found in Saskatchewan and the ways in which we go about both picking and identifying those mushrooms. So today we're looking at a very unique group of fungi. These are more or less mushrooms, but basically the only thing that brings them together, the only commonality they have is that their ecology is parasitic. So this is either a fungi that attacks another mushroom or attacks some sort of tree species. And this is, of course, also discluding the polypores, many of which are also parasitic. So this is going to be the edible parasitic fungi of Saskatchewan. The genre that we will be looking at include Armillaria, Crugonphus, Gomphidius, Hygrophorus, Hypomyces, and Ustalago. So what are parasitic fungi? These are fungi that attack a living host that is either plant or fungi. And when they attack it, often they kill it or they change it on a fundamental level. So we're going to see some really strange stuff here. All right, so the first one we're going to look at is the wine spike. This is very common in Saskatchewan. This is Crugonphus vinicolor. So this also, just to add in there, this should not be confused with the wine mushrooms or the wine giants that are commonly grown in people's gardens and that also occur in Saskatchewan. This is a parasitic species, and it is not the same one that many people may be thinking when they hear the words wine in association with a mushroom. So the cap is dark brown to reddish brown in coloration, and it is radially streaked. So you can see that streaking coming down to the margin from the center occurring there. These are convex to campanulate when young. If you remember, campanulate is where you have that umbo and then it kind of expands outwards and creates the shape kind of like a classic bell that you would see in a bell tower. And then these flatten out with maturity. Often they will still retain a little umbo though. They may develop a small umbo or shallow central depression with maturity. So if you have a central depression with an umbo in it, that would be called umbinate, I believe, or umbilicate, one or the other. So these stain wine red when they're damaged. The margin is smooth and down-rolled, and you can see it's very much in-rolled in this one. The cuticle itself, so just the surface of the cap, is smooth. These grow up to about 4 inches in diameter, though they're usually a bit smaller. Here's some size references for you. The gills are ochre orange when young, turning dark brown to black with maturity. They are decurrent, so running down the stipe. They are subdistant, so not quite at that distant mark yet, but they're getting there. Short gills are very frequent, and you can see at least 3 or 4 different lengths being used there, and some of these gills have 3 or 4 short gills between them. This is covered with a thin courtena when young. Now, if you recall, a courtena is like a partial veil, but a partial veil is a membrane, whereas a courtena is a series of web-like fibers that protect the gills. It almost looks like a spider has laid a very thick web over top of the gills. And then, of course, this has a grayish-black spore print. There, not a very good photo at all. It's all I could find demonstrating the courtena in this. You can see, if you look there, it has these kind of white fibers, web-like fibers. So the stipe is wine-colored to reddish brown. It's cylindrical to rooting. It is often curving or twisting. And you can see that there. If you remember that size reference, you can see how long that stipe was. And at the base, it actually is almost like a carrot. It kind of tapers at the base there. So that's what we mean by rooting. It has a central attachment to the cap itself. It's very fibrous, so you can see those longitudinal ridges going up that stipe. It's basically almost like cords, like a series of fibers. There is a ring zone, and if you look closely, you can see that ring zone up near the apex where it's a bit lighter right before the gills start. and then it's up to about 6 inches long and a ½ inch thick. Now, these are mycorrhizal with jack pine, and for a while that's what it was believed was the extent of their ecology. It's now known that these not only grow where jack pine is, but they also grow where slippery jack mushrooms are occurring, and that is anything in the Swillis species. And what this mushroom is doing is it's actually developed a mycorrhizal relationship with the same tree that the slippery jack mushroom has, but it's actually feeding on the mycelium of the slippery jack mushroom, weakening that species to better enhance its own strength and viability with that tree, most likely. So these are terrestrial mushrooms. They occur midsummer through to fall, and they are found solitary or in small groups. A very interesting mushroom. The edibility is pretty good. They have a mild taste. When you dehydrate this mushroom, they dehydrate very well and the taste is enhanced. The odor is non-distinctive. These are collected and commercially sold in Mexico. And these are also good for intermediate mushroom pickers. They are, however, possibly confused with some of the Cortinarius species. That's what we're seeing on the right-hand side. And the reason is because there's some similarities in coloration and in the stipe with some types of Cortinarius. And they also both have a cortina. So if you're familiar with this mushroom, then pick it. The first time you're looking for it, might be good to ask somebody who knows a bit better than yourself. Because some of the Cortinarius species, the vast majority in Saskatchewan are of unknown edibility, but there are a lot of Cortinarius species that are known to be toxic. And when a Cortinarius is toxic, it can be fatally toxic in the most brutal of manners. So people generally leave that genus alone. The next mushroom we're going to look at is very similar. This is the Slimy Spike Cap, Gomphidius glutinosus. Something very interesting about Gomphidius and Crugophis, which we both just looked at. These genus are very closely related to Boletes. So these are actually Boletes. And if you remember, a bolete is a pored mushroom, kind of like the porcini or the red-capped boletes that we saw, or the slippery jacks. But these ones actually have gills. They have a gill structure. So they're a bolete, a gilled bolete. It's interesting. So this is the Slimy Spike Cap. These are dark brown to gray, becoming blackish with age. They are convex or campanulate, flattening out with age. The margin is smooth and deeply enrolled when young. The cuticle is smooth and kind of slimy, as you can see there. And then a slime veil coats this mushroom completely, and it breaks away with age. It's almost like if you're familiar with the Amanita genus and you see mushrooms in a universal veil, it's almost like an egg. Imagine that, but slime. These grow up to about 5 inches in diameter, so they can be fairly large. Here's a size reference for you. Take note of that staining there on the right. So the gills are off-white to gray, turning black with age. They are very deeply decurrent. You can see that there. They are subdistant. They have a waxy feel to them. And there are short gills present. But there's also forking. You can see that some of these gills are forked. And that's a very distinctive feature here. These also produce blackish spores. The stipe is off-white with a yellow base, cylindrical to rooting. So when we say cylindrical, we're talking like same width throughout, and then rootings like a carrot, right? Is slimy, central attachment to the cap, staining yellow at the base when cut. If you remember the picture in the size reference there where it was cut in half, and the stipe grows up to about 4 inches high and 1 inch thick. There is a bit of an annulus there. The slime veil forms a sheath that kind of ends right near the apex before the gills start. So it has that slimy sheath remaining. And then at maturity, spores get caught at the rim of that sheath of slime and they create a black ring. You can see that has happened there. that's actually the spore color. So these are mycorrhizal with spruce and fir, but they're also parasitic towards the mycelium of certain Pseuilus species. So a bit of a different range than what we just saw, but once again, it has that same thing where the slippery jack mushrooms that grow nearby are going to be targeted by this one. It is terrestrial. It is solitary or found in small groups, and then this occurs midsummer through to fall, which is very much going to be the same as the slippery jacks. So you can expect this mushroom to have the same seasonality as the slippery jack or Pseuilus mushrooms that it is parasitizing. The edibility is pretty good, has a mild taste. You're going to want to remove the slime after picking. So if you know that these species are going to be nearby, bring some paper towels or some wet wipes or something like that. These are good in stews, soups, or boiled. Do not dehydrate. I don't know why. I've never tried to dehydrate them. The odor is not distinctive. And these are good for intermediate mushroom pickers. So when I say do not dehydrate, that's because I read it somewhere. And I'm just taking that as somebody has a reason for saying such a thing. This next one here is Gomphidius subroseus, a very beautiful mushroom. This is the Rosy Spike Cap. Again, a gilled bullete. So the cap is rose red to pink to tan in color with a streaked or mottled appearance. You can kind of see a bit of that mottling between those different pink tones there. It is convex or campanulate, flattening out with age. If you recall, campanulate again is just the shape of a bell in a bell tower. The margin is smooth and inrolled when young. The cuticle itself is smooth or slimy, as I would say. The slime veil coats the mushroom when young and then breaks away with age, much like what we just saw. This grows up to about 4 inches in diameter. Here's a size reference for you. So those gills are off-white, turning dark gray with age. This is a great photo for that slime veil that covers the gills when they're young there. You get an appreciation for why it would use that method. Gills themselves are decurrent. They are subdistant, waxy feel, very thick. You can see that there too. The short gills are present, but you also see forking, and you can see some forking in there. And it has, again, that blackish spore print that we should be familiar with from the last mushroom. Off-white with a yellow base, cylindrical to rooting. That stipe is, again, slimy, central attachment, staining yellow at the base when cut, up to 4 inches high, 1 inch thick. So this is basically the same stipe we just saw. It's the cap where the difference lies. So that slime veil forms a sheath denellus, and again, we have that black ring zone occurring because that slimy coating is still there, and it's catching spores and creating a black ring. In terms of its ecology, it is mycorrhizal again with spruce and fir, parasitic towards the mycelium of Pseuilus species. It is terrestrial. These occur solitary or in small groups, and they occur midsummer through to fall. And that's all that we'll be looking at for the gilled bullates. Oh, talk about the edibility. Exactly the same as the slimy spike cap. Remove that slime. Stick it in a soup or a stew. Do not dehydrate. So moving on from the gilled bullates for real. Here is a very, very interesting mushroom slash fungus. This is the lobster mushroom, Hypomyces lactiflorum. Uncommon in the entirety pretty much of its range. So this fruiting body is bright orange or yellow. It has a hard crust-like surface. It's often twisted and distorted or forming a vase-shaped structure. Grows up to 12 inches in diameter, so it can be quite large. And the original gills are gone. And I'm going to explain to you in a second what that means. First, I'm just going to give you a size reference so you can see how odd that mushroom is too. Now, the ecology is where this gets really cool. So this is not a unique mushroom that we haven't seen before. This is actually either Rosella brevipes or Lactifluus piperatus. So if you recall, that was the short-stemmed brittle or the peppery milk cap. However, what has happened is a type of parasitic fungus has attacked it, and that is what Lactoflorus Hypomyces lactifluorum is. And it has fundamentally changed this mushroom. It has gone from being a relatively poor mushroom to eat to being one of the most choice mushrooms that you can find. It has changed the color, it has changed the consistency, it has completely coated those gills, and everything about this mushroom is different. So it has the same range that you would expect from the original hosts, and that is hemlock with Rossella brevipies, or pine. I don't even think we have hemlock here, or near hardwoods when the host is Lactofluus pipeраtus. So the most fundamental change here, the biggest change, is in terms of its taste. So the taste goes from being bland and peppery to reminiscent of cooked seafood. So again, fits perfectly with the name lobster mushroom, as does the color and sort of that much more firm kind of breakable nature that it now has. This is great for beginner mushrooms because if you see this, I mean, there's nothing you can really mistake it for. It also smells strongly of cooked lobster. So a good one to find if you can. One thing I might recommend is that if you do find the original hosts, maybe just to leave them be and keep checking on them, see if they've actually been parasitized, because the original hosts are nothing special, but lobster mushrooms are. The next one we're going to look at is the olive woodwax. You remember we did a whole bunch of woodwaxes before. This one's a bit unique in that it is, in fact, you guessed it, it is parasitic. This is Hygrophorus olivaceolbus, the olive woodwax. The cap is dark brown at the center, becoming grayish brown or olive towards the margin. And see how dark it is there in the center. It's got that little tiny point that I like there too. So it's convex with a shallow pointed umbo. You can see that little spike in the middle there. And that flattens out with age, but it keeps that umbo often. The fibrillose cuticle is kind of made up of these pressed down fibers. Like you feel it's fibers, but they've been pressed downwards, and that's because it's covered in slime. The margin is enrolled when young and smooth as it begins to expand outwards, sometimes becoming wavy with age. These grow up to about 4 inches in diameter, though usually smaller. The gills are white in color. They are adnate or decurrent. You can see there's a decurrent tooth there. There's subdistant. The short gills are frequent, has a waxy feel to them, and there is a white spore print. So the stipe is white, but with these dark kind of grayish brown, very fibrillose and hairy scaling going over most of it, leaving the apex bare and white. So it is cylindrical in terms of its shape. It has a central attachment to the cap, and it is sheathed in slime. These grow up to about 4 inches high and 1 inch wide. So these are mycorrhizal with hemlock or parasitic upon the roots of spruce. I don't believe we have hemlock here in Saskatchewan, but we certainly have a lot of spruce. And these have been recorded as being found here. So they are terrestrial, scattered to gregarious, sometimes clumping together. And these are found late summer through fall. In terms of their edibility, it is relatively poor. Same with most Hygrophorus woodwax species. The slime is what discourages the picking. You want to remove that slime before cooking or right after picking if you can. These are for intermediate mushroom pickers. So this next one here is a very popular mushroom to pick in Saskatchewan. This is the honey mushroom, or rather honey mushrooms. And there are at least 2 species here, perhaps more. But the 2 most common are the honey mushroom, Armillaria melia, which is on the left, and the ringless honey mushroom, Armillaria tabascens, on the right. I'm sure from the names you can probably guess what the main difference between the two is. So the cap is golden yellow to tan to dark reddish brown, so there's a bit of variability there, and darker towards the cap center. It has a conical shape, and it flattens out with age, and it sometimes develops a shallow central umbo in Amelia, so the honey mushroom, or a shallow depression in Armillaria tabascens, which is the ringless one. There are small radially arranged scales. You can see that very clearly there. And that's not always present, but certainly in a lot of the photos you can see here it is, and a lot of the ones that I've found it is. The cuticle itself is smooth, so the scaling is really flattened. The margins have a crinkled or arched appearance at maturity. And I picked this photo because you can really see that clearly here as well. You can see that kind of crinkling look to it. And these grow up to about 4 inches in diameter. Here's a size reference for you. You can see how clumped they can become. So if you find a good ball of honey mushrooms, that can be a nice meal for you. The gills are white, becoming tan or reddish yellow with age. See, these ones are starting to age here. They are adnate, close together. The short gills are frequent. You can see quite a number of them there. These are covered with a partial veil when young, and they produce a white spore print. There is the white spore print for you. The stipe is off-white to tan in coloration. It is cylindrical. It is up to 8 inches long and 1.5 inch thick. Many stipes may actually be clumped together at the base. They have a central attachment to their caps, and the stipe is fibrous, solid at first, and then becoming hollow with age. So there is an annulus present only in Armillaria melia. So this applies only to that one species. There will be a white, very fragile ring that hangs. You can see that happening there. And there is a velvety yellow ring zone beneath that. And if we go back, we can see that clearly on the right-hand side. You can see those rings up there. Below them, it's very much got like this golden band. Often when you find these, you'll just see the golden band because the ring itself has been torn off or just was simply absent. Hence the name honey mushroom. In terms of ecology, these are parasitic towards both hardwoods and conifers, and then they become saprotrophic after the host tree dies. So they will kill the tree, and then they'll continue to feed on the tree for years afterwards. They often appear to be terrestrial because they infect the roots as well, and they'll be growing on buried roots and then appearing terrestrial as a result. These occur in the late fall, and they grow solitary sometimes, but more often they'll grow in groups and large clumps. And yeah, there's some nice ones there that you can see. Their edibility is choice. These must be boiled or cooked for a minimum of 20 minutes. They have a sweetish taste and odor. They are often used as a pierogi filling in sauces and gravies or in soup. You can imagine how popular that would make them in Saskatchewan. These are for advanced mushroom pickers. We'll get to that in a second, but one of the reasons is also below. These are mildly toxic. They need to be cooked for a very long time, or they will cause you some awful gastrointestinal distress. As well, many people are known to have allergies to this mushroom, so it's not for everybody. But here's another reason to be cautious with these. These are very often mistaken for Foliota species. Foliota have a very similar ecology. They grow at the same time of year, which is at the very late summer or early fall into late fall. And often Foliotas show up just before the honey mushrooms. So people are really itching to get honey mushrooms. They see what they think is honey mushrooms, and it's a scaly cap Foliota species. These can also be mistaken for the sulfur tufts, Hyphiloma fascicular, and those are very toxic mushrooms. They can cause paralysis and blindness for up to 2 days, make you very, very sick and very prone, and they have killed people. The main difference, beyond just the look and everything, is that Hyphiloma fascicular will have very different looking gills. They do not have a white spore print. They have a purplish black one, and their gills are often green. And then finally, here's the big bad here. This is Galerina marginata, the funeral bell on the right. They call it that because it kills you. Very, very toxic species. I don't know how to sugarcoat that. You'll see this particular mushroom, the funeral bell, in our presentation called Fatal Fungi, because it is fatal for the most part if you eat it. And you can survive it, but usually that involves something like a kidney or liver transplant. So you do not want to mistake the two. You should be familiar with them, look them both up, and get to know them both very well before you go a-picking. The next mushroom we'll be looking at is the last one. Now this one is kind of, I debated whether to put it in here. I'm not even sure if it's natural here. This one, it just simply has the same range as corn. This is corn smut, Ustalagomatus. Corn is not a very common crop, I don't believe, here in Saskatchewan, but sometimes people do grow it in their gardens, and where there is corn, there will be corn smut. So this is a fungus that attacks cobs of corn. It creates tumor-like galls that measure slightly larger than corn kernels. They're very eccentric in their shape. The entire cob is infected. Usually the entire cob ends up just being a blob of these infected galls. They are gray in coloration. And yeah, they look gross, but they're not. These occur summer and fall. Don't really know what else to tell you. It takes over the corn. These are choice edibles. They're considered a delicacy among the same rank as truffles. In Mexico, these are under much demand. There's a type of taco they make with it. I should have gotten the name for that. I didn't. I have eaten it before when I lived in Mexico, I believe. And these are very much something you want to look into. They're of significant commercial interest right now and are being cultivated in Canada, specifically, I believe, out in Ontario. And these are also good for beginner mushroom pickers, because if you find this, you can't really mistake it for much else. Other parasitic fungi would be Pholiota species, Tremella species, Hemipholiota destruens, most polypores, Chalciparis. It's one of the Bolotes, but we're just going to move on here because those are covered in other presentations. And that's it for the parasitic fungi. It's a bit of a unique presentation there. I hope you enjoyed it. And this is the Mushroom Wizard. Have a good night.